And we're on time. We're here. It's why we roll. It's the tabletop RPG design podcast from Stillfleet Studio. I'm Wythe Marschall, and as ever, joined by producer co-host.
Chris Pickett, that's me. Hey, what's up, everybody? How's it going?
That's the sound of Chris, the wonderful voice artist, ready, sultry Southern tones of Christopher Pickett.
Oh my.
Today we're really excited. We have a couple guests. So as usual, if you like the show, if you like our guests, if you like hearing about indie RPG design and what different designers are up to, sort of professionally, semi-professionally, how professional can we really be? It's RPGs. Then consider subscribing and supporting the show on Patreon. That's basically how we can afford the time to do this. And thanks to Potteration, the podcast network we joined, that's all about nerd games. So we like to think we fit in there as kind of a little bit of a meta pod. But today, I'm excited. We have two guests. We've talked with one recently, and we're really excited, Marco, to talk with you as well. So thanks for coming on, both of y'all. Thanks for making time. And we know it's a busy season, especially for a few of us, because we're working together on a crowdfund that's about to launch. So without further ado, we have Michael Cohen and Marco Serrano. And Marco, we're going to be talking to you for the first time, so we want to definitely, highlight your work and ask you a bunch of questions about it, because you've done a bunch of cool stuff. Your new project is cool. That's what we're working on to cross promote. But we're also interested in some of your other work in general. So you've written a few books, a few different RPGs. So why don't we do some quick introductions? Maybe Marco and then Michael, and then we'll ask some questions about what's up.
I'm Marco Serrano. I run the Spicy Tuna RPG company. We got our start in sci-fi horror, and now I love everything sci-fi horror. And now it's kind of starting to make some of our own games. I enjoy playing games, and I make games. So that's what.
Hell yeah, I love it. Keep it simple.
Yeah.
Isn't that's the acronym, right? KISS, keep it simple, stupid. It's like there's no sweetie, getting it wrong from me. Or sweetie, however you're feeling.
Yeah, I don't practice my intro, so that's gonna be my intro. On to Michael.
Oh yeah, I love it. And then Michael, like Wythe said, I wasn't there for this one. So, if you're listening to the podcast later, sorry I missed that one. I'm sure it was exhilarating. I'll find out soon when I edit. But we are also joined by Michael J. Cohen. What's up, Michael?
Hey, I am Mike, I was just on. Wythe and I just had a great conversation about our project that we're working on, Enter the Nostalgitron, which is a quick start, learn by play for Stillfleet. Hard at work on that. We're getting, to the, I don't know if it's the start line or the finish line with the crowdfunding. I guess it's kind of the start line, right? But I've been illustrating that and writing it alongside Wythe. He keeps saying that I'm writing it, and I keep going like, I wrote some of it, but we definitely wrote it. We wrote it together, and it's really, really exciting to have this come out. This is it'll be my first game of this sort. So this is all very, very new to me. But I've been an illustrator and graphic designer for almost 20 years now, professionally, and so now I'm finally using it to do something cool and not corporate work for hire stuff. So and partnering with Marco and Spicy Tuna has also been really fun because we've done some cross pollination, and it's pushed us to think about some cool stuff with what we're working on, and I hope vice versa. It's been a really, really fun experience. So I'm really excited to hear more about Marco's projects and his process, and compare it with what we've been doing and how we've been figuring things out.
Well, that is a beautiful that is a beautiful segue into talking about some of the work that you've done, Marco, and maybe what you're working on at the moment. I mean, I know that the three of you are kind of cross collaborating, and I figure that we'll but by way of like introduction, what's some of the stuff that you've done? What's some of the published work you have out there?
Yeah, and yeah, I kind of want to get straight to the cross collab. So I started with sci-fi horror. The very first thing that I launched was called Constant Downpour, which is based on the Ray Bradbury short story. Oh my gosh, Constant Downpour, The Longest Rain, which takes place on Venus. It's a psychological thriller. Shortly after, I discovered Mothership, which is just like the perfect setting for this type of like psychological thriller in space type of adventures I was writing. So I've written a number of about a dozen Mothership modules at this point. A couple of those like giant hardcovers, and now I started designing games, starting with a weird space RPG called Greenhorns, where you are creating planets, and then game called Cryodracus is in the works as well, which I just finished crowdfunding in February, and that is basically like a alien reconnaissance game, but has some flavor from arcade shoot 'em ups slash Super Nintendo shoot 'em ups like Gradius and R-Type. And then I've also been working on Blackthorn, which is what we're launching for Pocketopia, which is a straight up pulp horror RPG. It is inspired by tales that you would find in pre-code comics, as well as just like 1900s horror films. And so it actually started with, like, I love Mothership. Obviously, I've written a lot for it and I play it a lot, or I've played it a lot comparatively. But I always felt like for one shots, it did not necessarily fit as well in shorter sessions. So it kind of started as like a messing around with what a panic system kind of hybrid would work in a one shot, and making sure that all the consequences were dire, making sure that like death was highly likely, what picking up new characters would be like, and what would a focused story on like a singular one shot kind of movie-ish esque experience be like. And so that's where it like pivoted from. But as you probably know, if you rewatch like 1900s horror films, they can be really scary, but they're also just out of date. It's like you're watching things that are does not have seem as realistic sometimes. So you get to lean into that with either whether it's like bloodbath or just like over the top deaths or monsters, and you get a little bit of humor in there if it fits your table. But yeah, I'm very excited about the game, and I'm especially excited about what that cross collab has looked like with Enter the Nostalgitron, because there's actually like a dozen horror games in Pocketopia. But Wythe reached out to me, and I was like, oh my gosh, wait, this is like nice, because backers can get like two complete, like kind of separate games, but within the same like have a same shared like based on old nostalgic pieces of media. And then the cross collab is actually really exciting to talk about once we get there, because it kind of like Michael said, it maybe makes them lean more into a little bit more like a horror theme towards in it, and me lean more into like the like what is a Saturday night or Saturday morning cartoon feel like in a horror game, so like it's been really fun to think about. So
yeah, I think maybe we've talked about this on the show before, Wythe, you can remind me, but there is precedent for horror in Saturday morning cartoons. Like if you look at like the Care Bears movie, I think is the classic example where it's like the villain is absolutely eldritch and terrifying, but it's still, it's like very much a children's quote unquote movie, or like Dark Crystal, things like that.
We've talked about it in terms of Blister Critters a lot with like Ren and Stimpy, and the idea of like it's a show for kids that's lampooning consumerism in the 90s, the end of history, Americana crap, but it's like a really sort of terrifying that things are painted with literal meat. Like the artists were literally coked out MTV guys like using meat and blood, and like everything's really disgusting, and it's sort of Cronenbergian. It's like you're inside of a chihuahua, and like there's a lot of like weird things going on. And I think you can see lesser reverberations of that with like, certainly like Liquid Television, Beavis and Butthead, and Aeon Flux and stuff I stayed up watching. But the Saturday night stuff, or Saturday morning stuff, like, you know, gargoyles, and Ghostbusters, the short-lived Ghostbusters, terrible 80s cartoon. You know, these are kind of
I
like
take exception to that, but okay.
these are kind of attempts to metabolize horror. I think one of the things that's hard about horror for a little kid is like it's kind of hard, I think, to I don't know, like you could scare little kids kind of easily, but it also I think it would be hard to scare them with cartoons. I think that the way that kids' minds work about what is literal or what is real is kind of different. So at least for us, that was something with the art and text for Nostalgitron, where we're treating the very serious stuff in Stillfleet, but it kind of just looks less serious, so it produces a somewhat different effect. We found that in playtest to give players kind of Ninja Turtle-esque characters and be like, go through like a normal Stillfleet plot, but also all the villains are kind of Ninja Turtle bad guys, you know. So it sort of like has a different resonance. It's not the same, or it's not exactly the same or exactly different. It's like 90 degrees, you know. But yeah, no, I think making horror based on different source material is interesting and not something I thought too much about, being so obsessed with science fiction specifically until we interviewed Adam Voss and we're talking about horror based on really different specific subgenres like home, you know, realistic home entry, like, you know, funny games, like really messed up stuff versus slasher versus monsters of, you know, witches. And so I think, Marco, I mean, that's a question I had, a kind of your inspirations. You know, you mentioned classic comics and classic movies. I am not nearly the buff that Chris is, but we both, you know, enjoy movies a lot for one. And so, you know, I'm just curious, like, what are some things that really stood out to you that you wanted to, like, are we talking about like Creature from the Black Lagoon? Like when you're working on Blackthorn, are there a few movies, you know, if you had to pick 4, if you're sort of appendix N, right?
Ooh,
Your list of
gosh.
inspos. Is that too tough?
That's pretty tough, but yeah, you know, I'm awful with appendix N's because they're super popular in like the mothership sphere, and I honestly, like, I know I'm inspired by things, but I don't consume a lot of non-short content, unfortunately. Although getting into Blackthorn, as I've been illustrating more and just doing stuff that I can listen to things, I'm watching like a ton of classic movies on like Tubi and
Nice.
Plex, and there's like those are the two that I've used. But yeah, I mean, you know, I personally love like creature features. So like Alligator is one recently that really just stood out to me. And then I like the goofy stuff too. The thing that I really try to pull towards like the horror aspect, at least what I'm trying to do with like Blackthorn, is in and out of like high stress situations. And so a lot of these you know, like a lot of these ideas start with like a lot of the adventures anyway start with like a very like simple premise. So like creature features, for instance, are very easy. Like the one of them that I'm writing for Blackthorn is called Murder Bird, which is about a escaped cassowary that is just terrorizing, you know, this like small town that had a zoo in it. And you know, it's like, I don't know, like Alligator does a really cool job of that, where they have this intro scene where there's zookeepers taking care of this alligator, and then it like bites one of them and they have to like beat it off it. And so it kind of starts you out in this little like high tense thing, and then this little girl goes home with a baby alligator, because back in, you know, the 70s,
Yeah,
80s,
why not?
you could have whatever the hell you wanted. And you know, the dad gets tired of it and flushes it down the toilet. But then the rest of it, usually there's like a ton of buildup, you know. But it's a very interesting. I honestly love how they just like, they do your little jump scares, but it's not quite the horror yet, and you know it's there because they'll kind of show it to you. But the characters generally don't experience like high horror. They like start you out with a high note, kind of go back down, have little tiny blips in there for you, and then, you know, the climax. Actually, a lot of times I feel like it's kind of split between 2 engagements or 3 engagements, which I think, when I think of one, I enjoy seeing that, but I also think of like gaming is like, that feels so great, you know, where you can like kind of have a little bit of repose and come back and just kind of be all up in your face. So
yeah. I was going to ask you, have you ever seen The Winged Serpent, 1982's The Winged Serpent?
I haven't.
I think love it. It's a Larry Cohen film, so it's like really bad creature feature. Essentially, there's a series of quote unquote Aztec murders that are happening in New York City. And then at the same time, there's a giant flying dinosaur that shows up. And this like petty thief finds out where the dinosaur's nest is. It's in the top of a building. He finds out where he is, and then he holds the city ransom for the information. It's fantastic. It's just like chock full of really bad acting, really bad like everything about it is perfect for like a B creature feature horror film.
Yeah, I love that stuff. I just watched The Giant Claw, which is from like the 50s, 54. And it is, it's just so wildly product of its time. And I just love watching it. I just love seeing that stuff and how because it's very enjoyable to me for whatever reason. Despite it being like, kind of almost like I don't want to be like harsh in any way, but it's almost like objectively bad at this point, like just how you mentioned, like, it's a B creature flick. It's like, it's so like puppety, but it's from the 50s,
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's very enjoyable.
You think about like the way that people relate to memes now, like shitty memes, is probably how people related to that kind of content, because there was no internet, there was no you couldn't participate in mass media as a normal person that way, but you could kind of cobble together as a budget movie studio like enough to do like a creature feature, like a guy in a rubber suit chasing someone around or whatever. And so I think that had the kitschiness or the camp was like a feature, not a flaw even then. I don't know that people watched a lot of those movies at the time and were like, this is art. Some do stand out that way, like Gojira classically or whatever, like looks hokey now, but at the time, it's very early in that for that era and was really amazing and mind-blowing. But I think a lot of what followed was just like schlock. And if it holds up, it's because it's like good schlock or so, it kind of gets at like some of the things. And Michael, I know you and I have talked about that with like what is the camp? What are we trying to go for? How zany are we, or how serious are we? So again, for both of y'all, I think that's an interesting question of like how serious do games need to be, or how zany, or how like when you're thinking about a one-off and people who are approaching a new game, especially for like Pocketopia, right? It's meant to be sort of new games, quick starts, something approachable. What makes a good approachable RPG, I guess, versus something that is not necessarily not approachable. It's just not designed only to do that, or what I mean? Like it's a different way in when you're looking at the big thick rule book or the like mega 200-page dungeon book or whatever, right? Like it's a different task as a designer, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't know.
Yeah, is there a balance between kind of the zany design and very serious, high lethality? Everybody is a warrior. I don't know. I don't even know what genre I'm looking for right now. But yeah, is there a balance between like these kind of poles of design there?
Yeah, I think that there's an interesting dynamic at play there, and I think it's actually really similar to like live improv, like on stage comedy improv, in that when you get a group of people around a table to play a role-playing game, you're generally there to have fun. You're not generally there to do like a serious like, hey, let's do a dissection of the human condition or something. You're generally there for like a Saturday afternoon to have a good time with your pals. And so I think because of that, it tends toward comedy. It tends toward like you tend toward the silly every once in a while. So even when the subject matter of the game or the tone of the game, you crack open the book and you look and it's like it's very self-serious. There's always somebody at the table. There's always somebody at the table. I have a very long-standing rule when I'm playing D&D with folks. First session, I always say, whether I'm a player or I'm running the game, I'm always like, guys, no Monty Python, zero. Like not even just Holy Grail, no Monty Python at all. Okay, if you're gonna make a joke, go for it. Like it's not that we have to be serious, but like it's a little hack. It's a little bit hack. So
sure.
That's a tendency that I have seen. It's like you're in your first session and somebody gets hit and it's like, oh, just a flesh wound, and if you don't stop it, if you don't nip that in the bud, it just rolls from there and it just gets worse and worse and worse. So it's a funny thing to me, because I think that leaning into that for myself is definitely where I want to go. I like like that aspect of camp. I like I like absurd comedy. Like I like silliness, and Wythe, you and I, we go back and forth with some of the ideas. The stuff that always resonates with me is when we're being is really honestly when we're just being a couple of silly guys, like where it's like this is a fun idea, and I hope that when somebody cracks open the book, it will make them giggle, right? Like that will get a little chuckle or a guffaw out of somebody. But I also want things to be the only word for it that I have is rad as hell. Like that's the only way that I can say it. It's just like I want it to have a balance between those two things of being like super cool, super awesome, but also like we're adults pretending to be, a salamander alien with lightsabers, right? Like it is, we're already in silly territory. So why steer away from it? But like you can go that way, the way that I do, or you can go the other way, which I feel like Marco, you have with Blackthorn. Like it's when I look at the design and the aesthetic that you've put towards it, like it just, I love it because it's not where I would go. It's definitely not like my vibe and the sort of thing that I generally put out there. But like it's so evocative, the way that you've stylized everything.
Yeah, it's very dark. It is very pre-code comics in the way that things are stylized. And it's it's definitely really creepy. I mean, I was actually going to ask you, Marco, is a consideration in Blackthorn, like when you're writing it and illustrating it, is that something that you are trying to lean into, or is that something that is more I guess incidental or just kind of like historically put onto it?
Yeah, so it's funny because when you asked that question originally, I was like, man, I can never run like a fully serious game of like even Mothership or like when I played Bloodborne with Adam. I always say Vast because that's what I say, but I'm a huge fan of Adam's work too, and they just do an incredible job with horror. But it's never just completely serious when I play it. Yeah, so it's never like just completely serious when I play it. Yeah, but I never write with like humor in mind. Everything that I've written for Mothership or like Constant Downpour as a psychological thriller based on Ray Bradbury's work, there's not like humor infused in it, nor is there necessarily in Mothership at all. But I always play it as like you said, we're kind of silly guys just around a table, or guys and gals around a table and whatnot, and we're just having fun. And so it's very natural to be, for random stuff to happen that just like that rad as hell is like really similar to what I think of, which is like the yeah moment, the hell yes, like that's like the major action bloody scene that we were waiting for, So yeah, so as far as like designing it all, yeah, I mean, I 100% wanted to make it originally. So this was something that we kind of talked about, maybe talking about before, but I wanted to use pretty much exclusively public domain illustrations from pre-code time and pulp fiction time, pulp magazine time, and that's what I originally did. I was pleasantly pointed out to that I was using Virgil Finley's illustrations at first, and I was pointing out that they're very much probably not in the public domain as I had thought, and I was kind of a victim of not a victim. I didn't realize that archive.org was not like a super legit place, and then my other understanding of like public domain during the pulp era was that they had to renew their copyright, and if they didn't, then it was in the public domain, which is why a lot of the comics are, but they also could have just sold off those rights to the illustrations, and a lot of Virgil Finley's stuff was republished by other companies and his family and copyrighted by his family. So I, a week ago, scratched everything that I was using, which, I mean, it's not like I didn't redesign or highly edit any of it, so I didn't lose a lot of time. I just like lost work. I didn't lose anything because I never had it, but it was work that I was really excited about using, and I've just been on an illustrating spree in such sense. But yeah, so now I was kind of put in a place where I was like, okay, well, I still want to be I want to gain inspiration from this time, even though I'm illustrating now, which is like exactly what people do, right? That's what creatives do. So it's not a problem. And then I also have like a series of one pagers. That's part of one of the things that we're doing with the collabs. And so for the one page adventures that I'm writing, I am actually using slightly edited and recolored illustrations from pre-code comics that are in the public domain. So I kind of took some covers, kind of pulled out pieces of them, blew them up so they could actually fit well on like a 5x5, 300 DPI stuff, and then stripped the color and just kind of, I made them more, our colors are just very kind of muted, not super bright like the comics are. So keeping it with the Blackthorn theme, I kind of just recolored them in a very analogous color tones and stuff like that. So yeah, but yeah, definitely.
So I have a question for both y'all. In terms of art, like you're talking about a public domain art and trying to identify what is public domain. For listeners, like as a practical matter, making games and being like, oh, there's a lot of free art on the internet. How do you know? Like, are there some safer places you've now identified, or like more legit, or just easier to kind of, tell the difference between it definitely is public domain or not? Like I've looked a lot at like just like Wikimedia tends to be pretty good, I think, or like government sources. The National Gallery of Art, certain museums will have like open access or public domain stuff. But to your point, it may not always be obvious. So I don't know if you have any like thoughts or tips or stuff, or you don't want to say because you're trying to keep the sources. But
no,
where do you find the ill stuff?
Yeah,
and Michael, I don't know if you know this either. This is both of y'all.
What's the sauce, Marco?
Right. Well, yeah, for me, this is actually the first time I ever try to use public domain work. I've always worked with artists, and so I think that's why I've been telling people that I know it's just rookie mistake. Like, I'm really glad it was pointed out to me. Like, thank God, and super happy. Like I said, I didn't lose anything because it's never mine. I didn't lose time. Like that is in the public, or is not in the public domain. It's copyright, which is good, and I like our public domain availability to like screw a new idea onto like past artwork. There's a lot of people in the RPG space, like Cesar Cabacol comes to mind, who uses like pretty much only public domain work, and it's just like done really well, and just like put a whole game into like somebody's artwork from 200 years ago, and it's super cool. Yeah, there's a government site where you can look up copyright, which is where I kind of double checked some of this Virgil Finley stuff. I don't have it on me right now. It's like COCAP something.gov. If you do like show notes, I can send it to you afterwards. That's where you can check.
I was gonna say, we'll have show notes with all that.
But really, like the laws here, the really easy one to do is like after 1923, and then 95 years after the illustrator's death is like the very clean cut ones. And there are, like I mentioned, there's a lot of like Comics Book Plus, I think is the website, is where I got like the comics at. And that one also, they like kind of only house public domain stuff. And that's where like that kind of weird thing happened between like the 20s and like the 56, I think. There was this kind of odd, there's a different rule for public domain. And so you had to re-up your copyright. And if you didn't, it fell into the public domain. And pulp magazines just went out of business too soon, or like didn't have the money anyway. So that's why a lot of that stuff is public domain. And like you mentioned, all the museums and stuff. But yeah, there's a lot of really beautiful, awesome stuff to be able to like kind of spin into tabletop. I feel like tabletop people are incredibly creative with public domain work, because we're not all multidisciplinary creators,
No, for sure. And also, I mean, the artist, I like working with artists and prefer it. But so, Michael, not to talk yourself out of a job, but do you have any thoughts on if people can't afford an artist or don't know an artist, they're not going to work with an artist?
Yeah.
Do you have any
Michael
thoughts on,
and Michael and I are suspiciously quiet right now. Like,
I mean, we have some public domain stuff in Enter the Nostalgitron as well, because we're using some of the James Webb Telescope imagery of
Very
like
cool.
nebulas and stuff like that, because rather than find some because I knew I couldn't illustrate that sort of thing. That's not what I do, right? Like my stuff is very comic booky, very cartoony, but I wanted to have something that had that really cool space vibe to give us that sci-fi feel, and I just was like racking my brain on it and thinking like, oh, should I go? I have in my graphic design work, I have a couple of resources that I use, subscription sites and stuff, to get royalty free stuff. But royalty free and public domain are different, right? Royalty free means you can use it as much as you want to a certain point. Different licenses are going to have different stipulations, and certainly when it comes to building a website or doing some podcast art or something like that, you're generally with those licenses pretty safe. But if you're going to print something, the second that you get into that space, or you're going to broadcast it like on actual airwaves, like on television or something like that, then those licenses start to get really sticky, because it's, oh, you have this many uses, and then at that point you have to re-up the license, and you have to track that stuff. And it's really, really complicated. So I was like, I don't want to go the royalty-free route, because most of the stuff is kind of garbage anyways. It's fine for corporate stuff that nobody really takes a deep look at. But if we're doing something where it's like the aesthetic of it is part of it's part of the point, right? Like it's part of what somebody is buying. Then I was like, we need something really good. And then I just had a moment where I was like, oh man, I always get these TikToks of like the latest James Webb or NASA images. I just recently got one of a bunch of like incredible imagery of the planets in our solar system. And I was like, ooh, maybe I can work those in. And it's like, we don't really have a spot for it, but I just saw the images and was like, oh, that's really, really cool. So it just clicked for us, for our project, of like, well, NASA is basically like their attitude towards it is, these are scientific images. They're beautiful, right? They're not it's not as if they're just it's a photograph, right? Because the images that we see from the James Webb Telescope are composites. It's a bunch of different images stitched together, and it's oftentimes across different types of wavelengths. Some of it is light, some of it is like radio frequency, and like they're charting radiation and stuff, and then they go like, the visual of this is really neat, and if we overlay it onto the actual light that we're seeing, then you start to get these different effects and different images and stuff. So there is artistry and there's technical work that goes into even producing those, and then I take them and I made them, like I said, rad as hell, right? Like I took neon colors and gradients and stuff and recolored them to match our aesthetic. So yeah, I feel like, Marco, you and I did really similar stuff. Like we kind of had a similar idea towards that of like let's just source this, and I think that's fine. I think that's totally fine. I think it's about it supporting the material, right? So if you're just looking for something that doesn't have a copyright holder so that you can just kind of get away with something, I think that's shaky ground to be on in the first place. But if you have an idea already and then you're like, oh, this public domain art is actually going to not just like support it but enhance it, right? If you were going to do something, I'm a big fan of Paradise Lost, of the epic poem, right? Like I really love that story. Who isn't? Right. And it's there are some incredible like lithographic artworks and stuff like that are absolutely in the public domain at this point. So if I was going to make a game based on that, I wouldn't use my own art, because my art isn't the aesthetic that I would want for a game like that, right? So that would be the first place that I would go, is I would start sourcing that, and then from there I would probably then try and find some way of like extending that, and whether it's creating new art, trying to emulate the style, or doing some sort of like Photoshop manipulation or whatever. And a lot of people nouadays would go the AI route. That's what a lot of people would do, which is like where you get into even worse territory.
Yeah, right? we don't even touch that shit. I mean, I will say, it probably, I think the morality tale here is definitely check your sources. But I do think that John Martin's and Gustave Doré's illustrations of Paradise Lost are certainly in the public domain.
Yeah.
Partially because I've
also
seen them in other RPG books.
Yeah.
Probably,
no, Duray, and I think that's probably safe to bet. And yeah, Duray I've definitely seen in RPGs. But I really want to underline what Michael you said about like intentionality, because I think some of it is even beyond like legal stuff, which is really just like how also like this, we're real small potatoes. It's like sampling before rap got big. It's like nobody cares. Like it only matters if we blow up. So it's a great problem to have. If we make millions of dollars and we get sued, awesome. I mean, not awesome, but you know, we're communists. We
decent.
Like,
Tracking what you're saying. Yeah.
But more than that, to Michael's point, it's like, wait, is it any good? Like, are you just throwing in? Because I you know, if I now, I think I'm a little smarter about it now, but like when I first started with Stillfleet, it was like, I don't know, I'm not an artist. I don't, you know, I think in terms of words, I kind of have images in mind, but like, I don't even know really what I want. And so if I was looking at public domain imagery, it's like, yeah, the use case, it's not about the legality so much as like, is it a good fit? Whereas I think Marco and Michael, you both were describing the opposite, right? And I know Chris with, I know you've drawn your own versions, but like the source art from the Middle Ages, from the actual 14th century for Danse Macabre, where you've done the research, you have the image, and then you do your version. It's like all three of you started projects where it's like, let me intentionally find the kind of image I want, and I know what I want, right? Which is very different from, not that you're not surprised at all by the tone of it, the discovery of the actual, you know, pixels, but you kind of know what you're looking for. And I think that is a little different. And maybe that's where it's just a more matter of like that pure creative design, like before you put pen to paper, like as you're just wood housing, you're putting words on the page, like what is your game about and what is the vibe of the game? And like how are you making it rad? Like what does rad mean to you? So I really appreciate that. And Michael, I also appreciate just the James Webb, and all work like that. Although James Webb is really one of the like modern wonders of the world. You know, there's so much work that goes into making science visible to humans, because so much stuff happens at a scale kind of below or above the level of the human sensorium. And I think about it a lot as a writer writing about sci-fi. So Marco, I mean, this is somewhat of a bridge back to Mothership and your work, but like, you know, when you're describing things that are supernatural, quote unquote, you have to put them in natural terms. Like you have to put them in ways that a human reader can be like, I can imagine experiencing that. And so I think there's something to really thinking about, like starting with a photograph. Like I think there's a really famous book in the history of science. It's very good. People should read it. It's just a fun read called Objectivity by Lorraine Daston and Peter Gallison. That's all about how scientists show, like, how do you become objective through instruments? So you're like, whatever the microscope says is true, not what I think. It's like whatever I see. If the slide shows that the cells are so big or so small, then, you know, it is or isn't a certain disease. And like a lot of it is that kind of stuff. Like you're saying about pseudocolor and different spectra. It's like, we can't see space because it's too big and it's too dark and it's also sometimes too bright. So like to get a picture of a nebula, you have to like widen the lens beyond the scale of like, it's like unimaginable, like beyond the scale of the solar system, you know, and you have to do a bunch of stuff with color and lights. So it's crazy to think that like our minds are now filled post, you know, 60s, 70s, especially with like, they're real images, but they're also like, they're not one-to-one. They're not like, you know, the idea of the future where you like tap the side of your face and take an image of whatever you're seeing, like of glass, because they're so manipulated and they're on such vastly different scales. So I think that's an interesting, just like kind of analogy to like when you're making games, what are you simulating? Like you're not trying to do one for one, like, you know, scare people as in like go to their house and like stab them. Like you're trying to like set up like a simulation.
The ultimate role-playing game, breaking in.
The ultimate, yeah. If you pay us a lot, then we'll run that one for you. Yeah, that's a weird. That's a weird flex.
The high GMing fee, but we'll do it.
Yeah, but yeah, no, that's well. Yeah, go ahead, Chris. Sorry, you might have a better actual question there.
Well, I don't know. This is another segue that I have for us, which is, you know, speaking of translating the vastness and the horrors of the universe, how we do that aesthetically and through words. This is a clunky transition into talking about the collaboration between Blackthorn and Enter the Nostalgitron, which is putty madness. Marco, do you want to speak to what putty madness is and how one contracts it?
Yeah, so I think the greatest thing about our collaboration was it happened over the course of like an hour conversation, and we were talking about how we were excited that, you know, it was similar enough but not just like directly in the same world. And and this was actually either Wythe's or Michael's idea, because they have a, like, your classic kind of putty henchman and called the Splurge, and there's a bunch of like putty related isn't it Power Rangers putty men? Isn't it actually called putty men? Yeah, like there's like the kind of like
in the
on Power Rangers.
in the early 90s Power Rangers, the Saban like what ripoff show, they called them putties. But they're literally just clay golems were routinely murdered by the Power Rangers.
Yes. Yeah, you hit them and they like turn into like basically hardened,
like disappear or whatever.
So so the Splurge kind of brought I think the Blob was brought up by I think even Michael Wythe, and we're like, Blob, perfect, let's do the Blob. But it's basically like one of the Splurge got sent back to early 1900s, and during that transportation, I guess, it became massive and basically indestructible, and so it's basically a play off the Blob, derived from Enter the Nostalgitron. So
yeah, and we should say, so the Slurps, going back, I like the Splurge too. We could
shoot, is it the Slurps? Oh my gosh, I've messed that up so much. I'm sorry.
No, this time it's Zool, it's Slimer. But so you talked about classic movie monsters, and so for ours we put in a werewolf, a classic 1920s troubled teen boy who turns into a wolf. So a little bit of a spoiler, but if you back both campaigns, you get these extra scenarios. So one's for Blackthorn, one's for Stillfleet, but they're kind of as if a character has like walked into the, has been time, translated through time by far future technologies of some kind, and they're kind of in the wrong game, but in a fun way on purpose. So that was a fun, for sure, moment of like, I don't know, how do you collab? Like what, we've done like some marketing crossovers, like in terms of cross posting, but we've never like collabed with another game that way. So it felt like very natural, given that our whole thing, especially with this one, is like kind of inter-genre, mixing things up, and just tropes. So it was like, take a different trope. And to what you're saying, I mean, I definitely think for me, the projects go together because they're both about kind of retro projects, but taking them seriously on their own terms. Like you said, it's like Blackthorn's supposed to fill you with pleasurable anxiety of a horror game, and our game is supposed to be kind of an epic sci-fi adventure, even though it is also at the same time. It's to me, it is closest to like, Adam Green's comics or like Justice Warriors. It is serious. It just looks like rad as hell, right? It looks like the world has been psychedelicized, which other games, there's a lot of psychedelic weird sci-fi now. I generally prefer also like Mothership and Stillfleet type stuff, but it was really fun to be like, no, this one is just all the way down like weird. So anyway, I think the play with genre is definitely something that like, we're allowing ourselves to go on a little walk, a little adventure here.
A little walkabout.
Yeah. Like Putty Madness. Oh, sorry. I was just gonna say Putty Madness. Yeah, it definitely is like way more infused with. Well, I haven't read it yet. I'll be honest, but it's going to be way more infused by the by the '80s cartoons, by humor, and by it kind of like the horror of this thing taking over, but just having some more like comedic relief throughout, and then how to defeat it also is going to be just kind of outlandish and exciting, versus like pure horror thing.
Yeah. I mean, again, there's this really interesting precedent where in the 80s they started remaking a lot of creature feature movies, or like putting a new spin on it. Like I'm thinking about what's Monster Club, I think is one of them, or like I don't know, the one where the teenager finds out that a Dracula is living next door, stuff like that. But there is this kind of, and there, I think there's an 80s or late 70s of the Blob as well. So there is this kind of like very interesting cultural synthesis that's already happening that you're kind of tapping into with this work as well.
And science and horror kind of colliding. Anyway, I mean, I think there's like there's eras. Ethan and I've talked a lot about that. About like every other decade, there's like patterns that recur in culture, and so there's sort of certain remakes will take like 20 years off and they come back. But Michael, I'm curious about your appendix N. We talked a lot, like when we were talking about Alien, about certain movies, but just in general, like I know we've talked about so many different shows in the course of Nostalgitron. So for you, like, what are some classic, like what were some of the things highest on your mind? Like we talked the most, I think, about, I'm gonna say TMNT, but we just talked about Power Rangers too. So like I don't know, what were the actual shows that you like as a kid were watching, sci-fi, horror, comic, whatever?
I mean Ninja Turtles, I've talked about this on my podcast multiple times, but Ninja Turtles is quite literally one of my first memories.
Yep,
I have a very, very vivid memory of like sitting on my dad's lap when I would have been like 4, when that first premiered, watching the very first episode of Ninja Turtles, eating a bowl of Fruit Loops, and like what I joke about oftentimes is that, like, everything that I do in life, everything that I pursue is just me trying to get back to that moment, right? Like that's what all of my art is. That's what this project is. Like that's the stuff that gets me excited. So Ninja Turtles it comes up a lot because that is just like very core to who I am. But Ghostbusters is also in there. We actually don't have very much Ghostbusters in it because I think Ghostbusters does go towards that horror side of things and a little bit less of the stuff that we're playing in. We have a lot of He-Man influence in Enter the Nostalgitron, which is something that was actually a little bit more my oldest brother's thing than it was mine, but I have still always loved the aesthetic and like the world of He-Man, the blending of sci-fi and fantasy, the way that it's like it's got that very like straight science fiction, but then is also like Conan the Barbarian, sword and sorcery. So that's always really, really fun to play with. And then Transformers, we talked about a little bit because one of the character PKD's still right, or his exosuit is very Transformers inspired in the very like blocky design. But yeah, I mean, like it all ends up being in there, and that's me stealing from the person that I admire the most, the creative person that I admire the most, which is George Lucas, because that's what Star Wars is. Like people act like Star Wars is this incredible original concept, and it really isn't. Like politically, it's based on a whole bunch of real world things, as you know, we're coming to learn all too much these days. But I like the aesthetic and the world building and stuff like that. So much of it is informed by other sources, by Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers, along with Edgar Rice Burroughs stuff like the Princess of Mars, John Carter, and all of that, which I always love. John Carter is one of my favorite movies, the 2012 film, and people take. Will. I'm fully aware, but I absolutely love it because it gave me the same feeling that I got the first time that I got into Star Wars, which is like I went to a world that I was like, I would like to exist there. I would like to go back there and get more of that. I left that theater like champing at the bit for more, right? But then people online are like, this is just a Star Wars ripoff. And you're like, oh my goodness, people, you need to learn a little bit of history, because like the word Sith comes from the second book in the John Carter series, right? So like George Lucas literally, he just like lifted it. He just like picked it up out of there and went, that's what I'm calling my guys. And there's a bunch of that. There is actually quite literally in Star Wars dozens of things that are things that he just pulled from other stuff. So it's funny. We talk about to
mention the Kurosawa movie plots.
Oh, I mean, the fact that like the plot of the first film is quite literally borrowed from Hidden Fortress, right?
Yeah, it's just Hidden Fortress.
yeah. But we're talking about public domain and like sort of the intentionality of using that stuff versus just like going, oh, this is free, so let's use it. But what we're doing with Nostalgitron is almost like it's almost parallel to using public domain, because when you look at everything, not quite everything, but there's a lot of stuff, especially as I'm working on the playset stuff, where the callbacks are much more apparent than they are with the characters, right? Where stuff is like, it's ours, we made it, but that's definitely Castle Grayskull, right? Like it's not, but it totally also is, right? So but it's parody, so we're getting into that zone of like, this isn't copyrighted, right? Because it's its own thing, but the reference is very clear. So it's a fun back and forth for me to take those things that I love and know so well backwards and forwards, and translate them and get them just far enough away that it's ours, but also close enough. And I think like that's been one of the trickier things in this project, is finding that balance of like, I don't want to make the joke too obvious, but I also don't want it to get lost, right? Like you gotta, when you're making Spaceballs, you have to make your own thing. It's got to be your own thing. But like yogurt and Yoda, it's pretty similar. Like right? We gotta be close enough that everybody gets the joke. You know what I mean?
But I would say it's not Spaceballs in that it's about tropes that are at a lower level. Like that's like a whole trope of like the a slug lord mafia guy with a little cute, I don't know, Zen master swamp creature, like who has a very specific kind of name again. And I think if you take one piece of that, so the look, but not the name, but not the archetype or the personality, the way of speaking, like when you go a level lower, you can remix tropes more freely. And I think that's more what we've done. And I imagine Marco similarly with like taking the idea of the blob, but then almost immediately you're going to put it in your own voice, in your own world, in your own storytelling. And so I think that's like another idea, like alongside parallel, like you're saying about public domain art, the intentionality. I think you can also be intentional about tropes, and it's not that tropes are bad, but it's kind of like, why are you using them? There's also another element which to the George Lucas story, which I think is worth mentioning, at least in brief, another book recommendation from Book Guy. But Curtis Merez is a great cultural studies professor, wrote an awesome book called Farm Worker Futurism that starts talking about Star Wars and how George Lucas grew up in farm country outside of San Francisco and made a movie about farming, but then instead of making about the real tensions around him, about essentially like Chicano farm labor, and like modernizing the U.S., like farms becoming for specialty produce, like all about California intensive like valley farming, and unionization of that. He made it about like this like sort of like Jeffersonian like white family on a desert that was farming. They're water farmers. So it was this weird sort of like, he stripped all the things around him about farming he must have seen growing up and just like didn't discuss them. And the argument is not that he's some evil guy. It's that he probably did that unintentionally. He was of a certain class, of a certain time. And the stuff he spat out was more allied to, as you're saying, John Carter, which is actually weirdly a very, like, I read that stuff growing up. I was like, oh, these stories are fun, but like they're really problematic in a lot of ways, the actual stories. The movie sort of denudes it of that. And it's just like, yeah, a goofy movie, but it's like, it's interesting what you can be intentional about and what you almost can't see the foreground background stuff of your own culture when you're in it. And I wonder, so he was maybe talking about real tensions and the failure of the New Left in America in the Star Wars movies, but it's also muddled in the way that all like, I don't know, I forget exactly how old he is, but sort of, I would say boomers and, Gen X kind of failed us in like doing anything politically, really, like moving the needle in any positive direction. So I think it's sort of, it's like he's of his time. And I think, the tropes were used with like genius level skill, but, toward what end? So I think there's two things. There's like being intentional. And then there's also like, why are you making stuff? Or like, is there a deeper meaning? And maybe for games, there's not, maybe it's all escapism, but, on this show, I'm always going to be like, I'm always going to come with some sort of deep, dark, hidden mission to unlock. All to say, I feel like we have precious little time, so I'll try to shut up there. Yes. But I feel like we should cover so much more. So Marco, we talked a little about Blackthorn. I wanted to hear more at Greenthorns because it sounds awesome and making up planets. And also just writing sci-fi adventures in general and some of your thoughts. But in addition to all that, I also really wanted to talk about crowdfunding in general and just practical advice. You've done crowdfunding, we've done crowdfunding. What are some things that you think about? I don't know. Like, is there anything that top of mind that I know you're kind of in the middle of it now, but like, if you could step back,
Well, you just wrapped one. Now you're in the middle of another one.
Yeah, that was silly. That was pretty silly. Yeah, I mean, I make a ton of mistakes, and I've reached out to or have had kind of newer designers reach out to me about crowdfunding in general and things to do, and speaking about ripping from other people, the templates are there for what a good crowdfunding page is, and the information luckily also is published by Kickstarter and Backerkit alike. Well, I don't know. I think Backerkit has a bunch of published stuff, but at the very least, the people who work for them will send you emails with lists of things that can help your page and what backers are looking for based on the data they have. So I generally really start with sending people just like pages that I think do a fantastic job for the type of project they're making. And so you might see something very different from a larger project like what Mothership did. They were doing a whole box set. They had a lot to talk about. They had 3 years, 4 years worth of game that they had already made. So the page, would take 20 minutes to read. But if you're launching like a zine, that looks very differently. And there are also campaigns that in the past just did an excellent job of sharing like a single spread or a couple spreads and a mock-up, things that make you seem more professional than you might be, which is also very helpful if you've never, if you're launching a project and they're like, oh, click on the creator, and they're like, oh, it's their first time creating. Oh, they've only backed like 5 projects. Maybe you don't have a lot of disposable income, so you're not really backing stuff. A lot of the trust has to be made in certain ways, and a lot of that has to do with how you're presenting your product more than what your game actually is. And sometimes it is having part of your game a quick start or a beta version or a text-only version for people to see, but generally it's like you don't literally rip what people have made great pages that were successful and like see what they did, see how they were showcasing the cover, the inside, etc. And if you're low on art, there's different ways to do that in very clean ways. And I think a lot of what crowdfunding is that, and then like you said, having a 70-point bullet list of things for your marketing lead up is generally better than not having that or done or not doing those actions. Like with Blackthorn, admittedly, I ran a campaign in February, so I have not, made the announcements page on like Rascal, for instance, which is like a community resource that they just review your own posts for. I haven't reached out to anybody about playing the game, but if you're doing that, you have to work like months in advance. So a lot of these like 70-point lists of things that you can do and should do or try to do, a lot of it is like being involved with different communities so that you can actually like ask, because you're actually giving back. And a lot of it is also being respectful to the point where, like you guys run a podcast, but if I reach out to you, hey, I'm launching Blackthorn this Thursday, can you have me on in the next few weeks? That's like kind of not as thoughtful as you would like to be. And in the moment of running stuff and feeling like you have to get the word out and everything, a lot of times I think people fall a little victim to themselves being inconsiderate of what people who talk about RPGs like would need from you. So I mean, there's a lot to talk about. It's a big topic, but that's kind of it. It's like, I think the basic points is find pages that look great, similar products, whether it's a module or a small game or a big game or whatever, kind of rip their template, picture, 1 paragraph, this section, this order, look at several of them, kind of just rip that template from public source of crowdfunding websites. And then also just try and work very far in advance. The more you work in advance, the better off you will be in general, because you can talk about it more, you can be involved in communities, etc. And you will have a bigger point list of marketing things to do, places to post that you can make unique posts to, and just be like really actually like conscious of how you're, not only just like, hey, buy, but also like, hey, these are things that I think are interesting, or my appendix N that was interesting to me, things that are actually kind of meaningful to people seeing what you're posting about versus like, please buy my thing, I have a week left, or resharing the same thing over and over and over. So I guess that's the nutshell.
That's great. That's super good speed through. I feel like speed run on crowdfunding. Yeah, I mean, what are some things? So, in terms of sharing stuff in different communities, I think Rascal is a good one. We just interviewed Rowan Zioliat Rascal,
Very cool.
who's
Yeah,
awesome,
just
and
last
we're big
night.
fans. Yeah,
Ron's great.
so the community, the fact that there's community press releases, and they actually look good, and that's a feature, not a flaw. Like they're not annoyed. Like they want you to post about your indie games and create and participate in a community and have a more or less trustworthy, neutral place that is moderated, but is like for indie designers, right? So it's not gate kept. That's cool. And I really like what you're saying about giving back and trying to participate in communities and like think about from their perspective, like what do they actually want? Like you could tell them once about your game, but beyond like, hey, I made a game, what are other things you could say? I think that's like a really basic one. So yeah, I think we're all going to be doing a lot of that over the next 3 weeks because as we record this, I know it'll come out a little later, but Pocketopia is about to jump off.
Yeah.
So I don't know, Chris, did you have other thoughts? We just hit an hour, which is the first time we're doing this experimental timekeeping thing we've heard of.
I know it feels uncomfortable, but here we are. No, I don't have any other questions. I mean, I would love Marco to chat you up about specifically sci-fi adventure writing. That's something that we talked about that we didn't get to, but I think that's just a perfect excuse to have you back on the show.
Be happy
if you would like to join us. But no, I don't think I have anything else to check in on other than that.
Okay. Michael, questions for you? Anything you wanted to ask Marco, talk about, before we close out today? And like you say, yeah, we're happy to have you back on, and we should do at some point. We may have to do when we do the Stillfleet relaunch, a real like deep dive into all of the other sci-fi stuff and kind of just talk generally a lot about sci-fi. So Marco, if you'd be interested in that, talking about Mothership and your sci-fi games, we may have you back on as a kind of like maybe a mini series. I'm making it up now, Chris, but I feel like
a mini series.
Yeah. I'm here for it. Yeah, I like the on the fly planning. We can do it.
We can do it. Yeah. We've done history. We always do. We're going to keep doing history, but sci-fi.
Yeah.
It's always there. But I feel like we could do a dedicated thing. But yeah, Michael. Questions, thoughts before we close it out?
No questions. Just again saying that Blackthorn is super exciting to me. I love everything that I've been seeing, and I can't wait to check out more of it. And working, like collaborating on this has been really, really cool. It's been a really fun opportunity because as we said before, like it kind of challenged us to really start to define what Enter the Nostalgitron was, so that we could figure out how are we porting these things back and forth, how are we sharing something with you, and how are you gonna get something into ours. So it's been a really, really awesome part of the process that was unexpected when Wythe and I started on this journey. And so I just really appreciate that. And I'm excited. I'm excited for the campaigns to actually launch and for us to see how that goes and all of that. But yeah, I guess just thanks for being a cool guy and collaborating with us. It's been fun.
Yeah, it's also been awesome for me. I also appreciate. I feel like we both actually have, and I feel like me more, but you guys have also kind of been very nice in saying that you guys had it too. We kind of have been tripping over our original deadlines and like things that we wanted to finish beforehand, just because of life and other projects. And I appreciate all the patience with it. And yeah, like I said before about our collab, I think I'm so stoked to actually write this. I have like already kind of figured out. I'm just so stoked to like have this crossover that is adjacent enough and bringing something new to, Blackthorn that that really honestly would not have been there as deeply entrenched in fun outside of horror, I guess, than otherwise. So I appreciate you guys too. And Michael Michael helped me out big time too. He did the logo, so shout out to Michael's work. And
snap!
Yeah, the word mark was done by Michael and is freaking awesome.
Very nice. Yeah, it's a very cool logo.
Yeah, should shout that out big time too. So yeah. Anyway, I appreciate y'all. So
Yep.
Yeah, same.
Very
It's
nice.
great to get the team together. Michael is a super professional graphic designer and artist, but it's great, Michael, to bring you into the world of RPGs, which I know you're a player and a GM and a fan, but have you make one. Marco, I know you're a vet with RPGs. Great to collaborate, and we can share insights. And I have so many ideas now, Chris, for crossovers. Like we should at some point just for spooky season. Obviously, we're going to play some Danse Macabre on the show. We should also just play a bunch of horror games. I think just a bunch of different horror game one shots and just spooky it up.
Yeah.
Just get real weird with it for that's all we do for a month. I'm just saying.
That sounds great. October, you heard it here first, folks.
That's right.
October. It's going to be real spoopy.
It's going to be spooky. So with that, we're not in October. We're in the spring. We're in March, and we are about to enter Pocketopia. It's the first one. It's basically Zine Quest, but it's got this cool collab thing, and it's Backerkit. We'll have to have an episode after where we break down, again, if people are interested in the practical advice bit, Backerkit versus Kickstarter and just the differences in these kind of campaigns. But for now, yeah, that's what we're focused on marketing-wise. And game design-wise, of course, we're always making a bunch of games here at Stillfleet. And podcast-wise, we have a whole bunch more fun interviews lined up. So thanks again to our guests today, Marco Serrano and Michael J. Cohen, Spicy Tuna RPG, and Archangel Wolf in design, illustration and design and illustration.
Design and illustration, yeah.
I knew it. Knew it when I said it. Archangel Wolf, design and illustration, respectively. Okay, with that, Chris, you want to close this out? Traditional final questions?
Where can we find you, Marco? Where can we find you, Michael? How can we best support the two of you and follow you on socials and all that good stuff?
Yeah, I'm at Spicy Tuna RPG on Instagram, and Blue Sky is mostly what I use. And then I have a newsletter that I really like writing called The Guac, and that's currently still on Substack. I've been on Substack for a very long time, and that's where I am. So nice. The Guac on Substack is like
Guac.
The Guac, yep.
And that is GUAC. I checked.
Yes, GUAC. Yeah.
Yeah, and you can find me at Archangel Wolf, Archangel with a K and Wolf with a U, on most social media, but I'm similar. Instagram and Blue Sky are my main ones. A little bit of TikTok here and there as well. But other than that, that's for all my art and design stuff. But I also have a podcast network, Thunderquack Podcast Network, where I host primarily at the moment. My two main shows are Forced Perspectives, which is a dedicated Star Wars podcast, and then Perfect 10, which is sort of just a pop culture discussion podcast where I have friends on and we just talk about things that they think are perfect 10s, which are not objectively 10 out of 10, but very, very much so subjectively 10 out of 10 for them. Nice. And we just kind of talk about the experience of that. And Wythe was just on talking about the Alien franchise kind of in general. But specifically about Romulus. And it was an awesome conversation. So people can check that out.
Nice.
Hell yeah.
Very good. Well, cool. Thank you both so much for joining us. Thanks again, Michael, for the first time. Marco, we appreciate you both. And we are looking forward to just keep chatting, keep working with in the future. But in the meantime, check out Blackthorn on Backerkit for Pocketopia. It's going live as of right now, as of recording, 0 days, 16 hours, 51 minutes, and 20 seconds. So check it out now. And then likewise,
it'll be live when you hear this. It'll be live
when you hear this episode. Yeah. So if you're listening to this episode on the podcast, go to Backerkit right now. Check out Blackthorn. Make sure to back it. And then also check out Enter the Nostalgitron, which Wythe and Michael both worked on. It's really cool. It's a Stillfleet quick start. It's got Saturday morning cartoons, as well as like really deep, interesting, gooey sci-fi. So yeah, make sure that you check out both those projects on Backerkit. Otherwise, this has been Why We Roll. As always, I'm Chris Pickett, and my co-host Wythe Marschall and I are going to sign off now. I'm probably going to cut this out in post, honestly. But thanks so much for listening. Like I said, this has been Why We Roll. If you would like to support us, check us out on patreon.com/Stillfleet. where you can support the production of Why Roll. Also, check out stillfleet.com, where you can check out Stillfleet, the game, Danse Macabre, the game, as well as the Questing, or not the Questing Network. That's another podcast that we're making. The Sometimes Kingdom and Blister Critters. All right, I'm going to stop talking now. We're going to hear the outro music. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
Sick. I'm going to click end stream. 5x.